So I'm really excited to be here with all of you at Conversations today to talk about a big project that PARCC is doing in collaboration with the National Policy Consensus Center and the Hatfield School of Government at Portland State University. We've been working on this for several months now, but the project is really just getting launched. And so I'm excited to tell you about where we are, where we hope to go, what we are doing. So as many of you know, and I would like to keep today informal, so if you have questions, by all means, just jump in. So as many of you know, the idea of collaborative governance is kind of a hot, sexy term right now in the public administration literature. Lots of people are doing research about how we get organizations to cross boundaries, whether those are sectoral, jurisdictional, organizational boundaries, to address problems. And collaborative governance really captures that idea. There's been a tremendous amount of research on the kind of theory and frameworks for collaborative governance. There's been less empirical research. And part of that, there have been a number of single case studies where people are doing descriptive analyses of what's happening, but we don't yet have a way to look at collaborative governance as a larger scale phenomenon. We don't have large N databases. And that's one of the things we hope to build here with the Oregon Atlas of Collaboration. So one of the reasons we can start building this is the state of Oregon has been using collaboration to solve a wide variety of public issues since the mid-1990s. And recently, PARCC and NPCC, the National Policy Consensus Center, really joined forces to create the Oregon Atlas, which is going to be an inventory that catalogs all of the ongoing state-connected collaborative work that happens across the state. So we're not mapping the universe of collaboration, we're mapping the stars and the constellations that are happening. But before I kind of talk about the Atlas, I thought it would be useful to give a little bit of background of collaboration in Oregon. So in the mid-1990s, Oregon started using collaboratives to address environmental problems, and their first collaboratives were around watersheds. So in 1992, the Applegate Collaborative started as an initiative to deal with conflicts over water management, and this became then the first watershed council that brought together groups from across sectors, public, private, civil society to address water issues. And that use of collaboration was really effective. This Applegate partnership got a lot of attention around its watersheds. And so after these experiences in the 90s, so kind of spread to having multiple watershed councils, and then the state of Oregon said, wow, we can really use these collaborative processes to effectively address conflict. So we've got a lot of challenges around how water is used, how forests are managed, and so the state began to institutionalize its support for collaboratives, and particularly to helping to address environmental conflicts. The next generation of these collaboratives really focused on providing authority for these collaborative groups to do capacity building with their communities, to deliver public services, to think about how to engage around healthcare issues, public safety issues, education issues. And then these collaboratives took on a policy advising role for the state. And so the Governor Kitzhaber, who's been around for a while now, he launched these things called collaborative platforms that would support the use of collaboration all across the state in a number of policy areas. And so we got together and we started thinking about how could we catalog all of this work in a way that would allow us to build a database to construct and conduct empirical research around collaboration, where it's working, where it's not working, what makes it succeed and fail, how we can support collaborative efforts across the state. And so really we wanted to catalog and inventory everything that's happening. So that's kind of the big idea. But backing up, let me tell you a little bit about what all of these things are. So as we are looking at it, as many of you probably know, the idea of collaborative governance has 1,012 definitions. People approach it from 1 million different ways. And so we are approaching it with these kinds of definitions. So first, we think of collaborative governance as processes and structures that enable public policy decision-making and management, that enable organizations to cross their boundaries and achieve a purpose that they couldn't otherwise achieve. And so that's kind of the process piece. And then the collaborative governance regime is the unit or the entity in which actors come together to engage in the process of collaborative governance. So a collaborative governance regime is a mode of or a system for public decision-making where cross-boundary collaboration is kind of the norm. And so with these definitions in mind, we started to think about what would the Oregon Atlas look like. And so what we're focused on specifically are state-connected collaborative governance regimes, state-connected CGRs that are associated with one of 13 collaborative platforms that are operating within 5 policy areas. So I'll break all of that down for you. So first, a state-connected collaborative is a collaborative governance regime that has a formal connection with the state government, either through a specific state mandate that says you must collaborate on this issue, or from a really strong inducement or incentive from the state that says, if you want access to this pot of money, then you must collaborate. So it's either like mandating it or almost mandating by creating such strong incentives. So these are formally connected with state government, and they are involved in creating public value over a particular period of time. So for us to be involved, we kind of try to break all of this down as 3 or more actors who are independent but have autonomy and who are operating within a collaborative platform. And I should say that some of these CGRs that we're looking at, some of them were self-initiated, right? So people came together because they had really strong views about early childhood education, and then they tapped into the incentive pots of money from the state. Some of them were really the state issuing a mandate. They're externally directed. They're top-down. The state says, you've got to work together, and they identified all of the participants who should be involved. So as these collaboratives have worked, the state has also built what we're calling collaborative platforms. Actually, this is a term from Ansel and Gash. And the idea of a collaborative platform is that it creates a structured framework at the state level for promoting collaborative governance. So it is these collaborative platforms help create a network among all of the collaboratives working in a particular area. It helps them connect and share information, share knowledge. It helps coordinate activities across the state, recognizing that what happens in Salem will be different than what happens in Portland, will be different than what happens on the eastern side of the state, but that there has to be some degree of state level oversight. And these collaborative platforms, their goal is to not just advance the individual efforts of these collaborative governance regimes, but also to help connect them. And then the 5 policy areas that this is happening in are health, education, public safety, natural resources, and economic development. So essentially what we have are 5 policy areas, 13 collaborative platforms, and 258 state-connected collaborative governance regimes. So this table shows that, for example, in the policy area of education, there are 13 collaborative governance regimes in the platform of regional achievement of collaboratives. Or there are 16 collaborative governance regimes working under the platform of early learning hubs. Right? So there are 16 early learning hubs, 16 collaboratives focused on early learning hubs. Does that make sense? Right? So we have the policy areas, the collaborative platforms, and the state-connected CGRs. So then we were like, wow, this is a really cool opportunity to build what is honestly the first of its kind large N database on collaborative governance. And if I'm honest, well, I won't say that, but I want to do it. I want to do it, and I want it to be super cool and really helpful. I wanted to advance both empirical research on these things, contribute to practice and theory, and really kind of move the field forward in its thinking about collaborative governance. So, okay, so we have all of these collaboratives, these collaborative platforms. What are we trying to do with it? What are the data? So the first phase was, and this was a phase that Qasim helped on, was to collect web-based information on all of these 258 CGRs, including where they work, so a map of the physical geography of things, how they work together, kind of who participates, what their networks are, their social geography, and then structural information. What are the characteristics of each of the collaborative governance regimes? Yeah, Catherine.
Out of curiosity, what is the range of the size of the CGRs? Do you know the largest?
I don't. I should know all of that.
I'm thinking
Qasim, do you know that?
What do you mean?
How many?
The amount of organizations working within one CGR, how high can it get? Is it just 20, 30, 100?
Oh, I can only speak about watershed councils. So there are different types of projects going on, and in certain projects you can have, I think you'll see 17 or 18 is the highest number of different organizations nationwide in a particular project.
That's great. So one of the things is we've collected all of the data, and now we're figuring out how do we analyze it, and we need student help. So I'm going to make that plug. But we have the data that are there, and it would be good to look at the size and the characteristics of these things is really important. And so we know where each of the 258 collaboratives are located. We know the over 4,200 names of individual participants who are in these things. And we got all of this information from websites. We know, so for example, you can see, so the data collection is complete. You can see here's some of the information about physical geography. So the collaboratives are happening across the state. You can see the kind of counties that have more collaboratives and the counties that have fewer collaboratives. As you might imagine, there are more collaboratives in urban areas, fewer collaboratives generally in rural areas. And this, I know you can't read the little dots, but it shows kind of natural resources, healthcare, education, public safety, and economic development and how they're dispersed across the state. We also, with Julia Carboni and I think with Catherine, is this true, are starting to do, maybe not, are starting to look at some of the network analysis here. So really thinking about the social geography. There are over 4,200 participants across all of these collaboratives. About 300 people sit on 2 or more collaboratives, and we're building these networks to look at where there are two or more organizations sit on multiple collaboratives. We know that Oregon's health collaboratives have the highest average number of participant per collaborative, which is about 45 individuals, not organizations. And the natural resources collaboratives tend to have the fewest individuals at about 14 on average. But there are 103 total natural resource collaboratives, and those natural resource collaboratives engage over 1,500 people themselves. So they're kind of the biggest entities here. We also collected all of this structural information about the collaboratives, from who their sponsors were, what their lead organization is. We've got their website data. We've got the roles filled. We've got the region. We know we're still doing data analysis, but about half of all of these collaboratives were self-initiated. 43% came out through some state directive and funding, and the remaining came out of some kind of independent convener. About 2/3 of the collaboratives formed to help deliver public services, and about another third formed to help solve policy conflicts. So they started out as policy conflict or policy advising entities. Almost all of these 258 collaboratives are implementing work. So they're past that startup phase. They've become embedded, a little institutionalized, and now they all have their kind of theories of change on the table, and they're working towards implementing projects. So we're trying to link all of this data across individual CGRs, the platforms, and then the policy fields. And again, so data, there's lots of data to be analyzed there that we have.
So an organization doesn't have to be part of the platform to be in the database, or it does?
An organization has to be part of a CGR, a collaborative governance regime, and all of those CGRs are now associated with a collaborative platform. So the organization may not have a direct tie to the platform, but it has a tie through the CGR. Does that make sense? Okay. So phase 1, we have all the data collected there. We're starting to do data analysis. And phase 2, we wanted to go and talk to people, right? We wanted to actually see what was happening around. So we held 5 focus groups across the state, 4 kind of regional focus groups, and 1 statewide focus group. The 4 regional were focused on pulling together the participants in the CGRs, and the statewide was focused on pulling together the statewide leadership of the collaborative platforms. We asked a number of questions about the strengths and weaknesses of collaborative governance regimes, what helps or hinders CGRs, what pillars of a policy might be. All of these focus groups are complete, and we have pages and pages of qualitative data that we are now analyzing. And I can give some summaries of where we are. So we know that the strengths and the weaknesses of these things, they fall into 3 big categories: people, purposes, and resources. On the one hand, the collaboratives are really good at getting diverse people to the table, building relationships, generating trust, but they also struggle with engaging new and different people, reaching out to new audiences and getting new members, recruiting board members for voluntary work that takes place over time, and thinking about how to sustain participation over time. They're great at purposes. Once they get people together, they can articulate a shared vision and goals, they inform decision spaces, they can build buy-in, they can deal with complex issues. But when among the collaboratives that are state mandated, they struggle with what the state mandate is, right? And what the state's articulated goals are. They struggle with building shared ownership. How do you build ownership over something when the state tells you everything you need to be doing? They struggle with power dynamics and with decision-making authority. So they want to come up with plans, but often they feel like they're overridden by the state, who has to approve things that they're doing. They're really good at attracting funding, but they also have a lot of unfunded mandates, and that's a challenge. They're really good at getting motivated people to use as resources, but they also lack a lot of people resources like facilitation, capacity building, data analysis skills, technical assistance. We know that the state does a lot of things that both enable and constrain collaboration. So they set out these mandates that really create wonderful conditions for collaboration to start. But when those mandates are very rigid and inflexible, the collaboratives struggle because they can't build ownership of things. They feel like the decisions that they're making won't necessarily get support. The state was really, really good at funding these collaboratives when they started up. But as they start to take actions and move towards implementation, that funding dries up. And it's not just financial allocation of resources. There's a lot of technical capacity issues that the collaboratives struggle with getting. The staffing can be really helpful if you get the, air quotes, the right agency person who believes in the process of collaboration, who's motivated to solve these problems, who's willing to be innovative and flexible, then collaboration can be great. But if that agency person always says, nope, we can't do that. Sorry, that's not a possibility. I don't have the authority to approve this. Then it really hinders and slows down collaboration. When the state provides trainings on things like facilitation or process design or participant recruitment or public communications, that's helpful to these collaboratives. But when there's no training to build those capacities, the collaboratives struggle with making their case for what they're doing or figuring out how to do complex data analysis or how to map different things. So there are those kind of pros and cons. These are all 2 sides of a coin. We asked what pillars of a statewide policy might be, and not surprisingly, these pillars really reflect those strengths and weaknesses and those enablers and constrainers, right? So they wanted to have a statewide vision where the state articulates clearly what the goals are, but they allow for localized action so that they can do what needs to be done within their particular context. They wanted more decision-making and autonomy, while also clearly recognizing that they have to cooperate with the state. They also wanted to have some sense of control over their theories of change, what they're hoping to achieve, what their implementation strategies are. The funding and resources have to be provided for the long-term vision, not just for startup. And again, that those resources aren't just about money. They're all about technology. They're about people. They're about access to spaces and places. And then that there needs to be an appreciation of leadership in multiple forms. It's not enough just to say this is the leader of the collaborative, but to also recognize that leadership comes in the form of those who are really good public communicators, or leadership comes in those who can analyze data and make that accessible to wide audience, or leadership comes from people who can convene and facilitate in high conflict situations.
So are there appointed leaders for these collaboratives?
There,
They decide that they may want a different one.
it varies from collaborative to collaborative and across platforms. So some collaboratives have a lead agency or a lead person that is kind of their head honcho, if you will, that really works together. All of the collaborative platforms have a state-appointed agency leader. But it's not just one kind of leader that matters in these things, is what they were saying. And then we asked how we could be helpful as we were doing this work. And they wanted a resources clearinghouse so they could get access to information that would be useful. They wanted our help building a learning community, conducting and disseminating research, building bridges, and acting as a communication conduit. So we're doing all of that data analysis now. And I will say it's really been interesting to look at the qualitative data about what people say helps and hinders, and to see how well that matches up with the collaborative governance framework that we're doing. The synergies are really interesting, and I think it's pretty rich and exciting. So there are two last things we're doing. So phase 3, which is ongoing, my little animation, ongoing, is to collect data on legislative intent and outcomes. So because we know that state government said, we want you to collaborate on watersheds and forest management, and we're creating early childhood learning hubs, presumably in those mandates or in the directives to set up resources, grants, and financial incentives, there's some articulation of what the state goals are. Right? What outcomes they were hoping to achieve. And so now we're trying to figure out, not only what did the state want the collaboratives and the platforms to do, but what data exist around those articulated goals? And can we look to see how outcomes have changed over time with the implementation of these things? As you might imagine, this is much easier in some areas than in others. It's also incredibly time consuming. And Qasim has been working on a lot of this kind of thinking about collaborative actions and outcomes in the watershed arena. So he's got access to this insanely complex database for the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And he's been looking at projects that have been funding and thinking about how collaborative structures impact efficiency of actions. And I'm happy to let you say more about that if you'd like to.
Sure. So one of the findings, it's still work in progress, and actually Tina and I are meeting a person from OWEB tomorrow. We're just going to talk on phone, and we have questions regarding data. And the entry is not clean, right? So these collaborative organizations, they are filling in some of this data, and it's hard to make sense of it. And we want to talk to the person and see what she has to say, and maybe she can clarify certain aspects of the data. But one of the preliminary results that we have found is that projects which have higher in-kind contributions, i.e. that the collaborative participants are pooling their resources, so those projects which have higher in-kind contribution, they tend to be cheaper, they cost less, they are more efficient. Compared to those projects which are solely funded by OWEB or the state agency funding the project.
Which is a really cool finding, right? To be able to show that collaborative projects tend to be cheaper, less costly than just state-directed projects. So it's really one of the first kind of times that we're doing large analyses on that. It's very exciting. And so this part is going to take time, right? This is a really challenging part to think through to identify outcomes and then to try to identify sources for data, especially at a statewide level. Phase 4, which is coming soon, is to survey all 4,200 participants in all 258 CGRs. And what we want to get to there are issues around collaboration dynamics, how the groups work together. We want to think about leadership in those processes. We want to think about how they're building their theories of change, right? Because if a collaborative is coming together and they want to change some condition on the ground, they've got to have a theory about what they do and how they do that. We want to collect data on actions, outcomes, and adaptations. And so one of the exciting things here is that We have a framework that we want to use for the development of these questions, but no survey like this exists. And so really thinking about how we have well-constructed questions and we don't create some crazy burden for people filling out a 22-page survey, which could easily happen. So that's been a challenge. But we also want to make this survey more generalizable beyond the Oregon context, because we have right now, while we're working on the Oregon Atlas, we really think that there are opportunities here to create multiple atlases of collaboration. So there's a lot of state level work happening in Colorado and Utah, for example, and we think we could create instruments that would help us collect data in those places. There's a lot of work in China, and we're talking with partners at universities about how we might create a survey to capture the collaborative work there, or in India. So we kind of have this challenge of creating a reliable instrument that is going to be generalizable to multiple contexts. So that's a really, it's a big challenge, but it's kind of a fun, heady challenge for those who like this kind of stuff. And so ultimately, the vision we have for this is to build the first large end data set on collaborative governance regimes in the world, which is, that's my favorite thing to say. And the hope is that this data set will have, well, the plan is, it's not just a hope, the plan that we're working towards is to have multi-level data so that we have just data about the individual participants, the organizations that are coming together, each of the 258 collaborative governance regimes, platform, the 13 platform level data, and then the policy area. So we'll have multi-level data, and the data will be geographic, it will be network, it will be structural, it will focus on process, outcomes, adaptations, it'll be quantitative, qualitative, all of those things. And it will span and connect kind of everything from the system context in which collaboration emerges all the way to its impacts, outcomes, and impacts. So we get kind of the drivers, the process, the actions, outcomes, and longer term impacts. And so to that end, what we've started, I'll give you just kind of a sneak preview, is, and we're slowly getting there. So this one is to build this website. So we're not, we want to have the data and kind of be on the leading edge of this, but then we also want to create things that are going to be useful to practitioners and scholars. And so we're working on building a website, and we're actually going to do some focus groups to get feedback from people on how to make the website more exciting. But there's all sorts of cool stuff on here, including this story map, which I've never heard that term before, but a story map that kind of builds the history of, I don't know how to get there right now, but builds the history of collaboration in Oregon. And so that's the project, the Oregon Atlas Project. We're super excited about it. We're really excited to be partnering with NPCC and to have the support of PARCC and to have the support of doctoral students. And for those who are interested in coming in and thinking about data analysis or designing surveys, there are really opportunities here for publishable pieces, and practitioner-oriented pieces to help with practice. So I'll stop there and say thank you. Thank you. Thank you.